Sophia Laurent had built her world on the illusion of love, luxury, and loyalty. As the wife of billionaire financier Daniel Laurent, she lived in a world of grandeur, an opulent estate in Greenwich, diamond-studded soirees, and a marriage admired by all. Yet behind the lavish facade, cracks lurked unseen. And one night, those cracks shattered beyond repair. A single envelope. That was all it took to unravel everything. The evening had started like any other, with candlelit dinners and whispered conversations beneath the crystal chandeliers Daniel had imported from Milan. But as Sophia sorted through the daily correspondence, her fingers trembled over an unfamiliar envelope. The sender? A private clinic in Boston. Confusion quickly turned to dread as she opened it, revealing medical records for an expectant mother, one who was not her. Her vision blurred as she scanned the document, but one name was unmistakable. Daniel Laurent, listed as the father. The due date was heartbreakingly close to her own. Sophia's stomach churned. The weight of betrayal pressed into her chest, suffocating her. The late business meetings, the unexplained weekend trips, everything now made agonizing sense. The man she had loved, trusted, and built a life with had been living a double existence. Refusing to break down, she steadied herself. This house, this life, had never truly been hers. It had always belonged to the perfect image Daniel had curated for the world. But she was done being a supporting character in his charade. With quiet precision, Sophia pulled out a sheet of parchment from her writing desk. Her hands trembled only slightly as she penned the final chapter of their marriage. Daniel, the betrayal you've inflicted is beyond repair. I once believed in the fairy tale, but now I see it for what it is. A beautifully crafted lie. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't look for me. You won't find me. She left the letter on his nightstand and took one last glance around the mansion. The towering walls, the gleaming marble floors, none of it mattered anymore. Taking only what she needed, she stepped into the black car waiting by the service entrance and vanished into the night. When Daniel found the letter 2 days later, the weight of his actions came crashing down on him. He had spent his career orchestrating billion-dollar deals, ensuring that no detail was ever left unchecked. Yet, he had lost the one thing that mattered most, his wife, the mother of his unborn child. Regret gnawed at him like an unshakable ghost, but it was too late. Sophia Laurent had disappeared without a trace. Sophia had always known that love among the wealthy came with complications. From an early age, she had watched her parents maintain a polished yet hollow marriage, extravagant vacations, sparkling galas, and a life carefully constructed for public admiration. Beneath the perfection lay silent resentments, but they stayed together, bound by duty rather than devotion. She swore her marriage would be different. With Daniel, she had believed in something real. Stolen kisses between business meetings, whispered dreams of a future filled with laughter, and soon, the arrival of their child. When she first learned she was pregnant, she had clung to the hope that their love would be strengthened by the tiny life growing inside her. Perhaps he would slow down. Perhaps he would see her, not as the elegant wife who stood beside him at charity galas, but as the woman who adored him beyond the fortune and fame. But love built on illusions can crumble in an instant. 5 months into her pregnancy, Sophia's world still revolved around anticipation. Despite the fatigue and the waves of nausea, she found joy in the thought of Daniel holding their child, of bedtime stories and Sunday morning cuddles. On a crisp November morning, as the cold wind rattled the windows, she sat in her study flipping through nursery catalogs. Would soft pastels create a sense of warmth, or should she opt for the elegance of neutral whites? Her assistant, Olivia Marks, entered, balancing a stack of mail in one arm. "Just the usual invitations and letters, Mrs. Laurent," she said, setting them on the polished desk. But one envelope stood out. A hospital in Boston, officially addressed to Daniel Laurent. Sophia frowned. His doctors were in Manhattan, his medical records handled exclusively in their city. A philanthropic endeavor, perhaps? A business investment in healthcare? She tried to ignore the unease creeping into her thoughts. Yet something deeper, instinctive, urged her to open it. With trembling hands, she tore the envelope open, revealing a crisp sheet of paper from a private obstetrician, Dr. Benjamin Caldwell. The moment her eyes found the patient's name, her breath hitched. Juliet Hayes. Sophia's fingers tightened around the paper, her pulse roaring in her ears. A due date, a list of prenatal tests. And then, like a blade to the heart, Daniel Laurent, listed as the father. Everything inside her fractured at once. The extravagant life she had built, the fairy tale she had desperately believed in, the man she thought she knew. It was all a lie. The walls of their mansion suddenly felt suffocating. The nursery catalogs in front of her, nothing more than a cruel joke. Daniel had another woman, another child. Her hands shook as she placed a protective palm over her own growing belly, realization sinking in like ice through her veins. She had been replaced before she had even given birth. The numbers on the page blurred as Sophia read them again. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a clerical error. The patient's name, Juliette Hayes. The due date, just weeks apart from her own. And then, Daniel Laurent, listed as the father. Her stomach twisted violently. The betrayal she had feared, the nagging suspicions she had dismissed, it was all there, spelled out in black and white. She gripped the arm of her chair, trying to steady herself, but the room felt like it was spinning. A cold rush of disbelief crashed over her, followed by something worse, a piercing, all-consuming pain that made it hard to breathe. For months, she had watched Daniel disappear for urgent meetings, taking last-minute flights and returning home with the scent of expensive cologne that wasn't his usual brand. She had believed him. How foolish she had been. "Mrs. Laurent, are you all right?" Olivia's voice snapped her back to reality. Sophia forced a strained smile, pressing the letter tightly against her palm. "Just a billing error," she lied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll handle it." But Olivia wasn't convinced. Her gaze flickered to Sophia's trembling hands, her tightened jaw. "Are you sure?" "I said I'll take care of it," Sophia replied quickly, shoving the letter into the drawer. "I just need a moment alone." As soon as the door closed, she collapsed onto the chair, her hands instinctively resting on her belly. She needed to stay calm, for the baby, for herself. But how could she? Everything she had built with Daniel, the future she had envisioned, had crumbled in a single moment. She reached for her phone with unsteady fingers, her breath shallow as she scrolled to his name. Daniel Laurent. The man she had loved. The man she thought she knew. She pressed call. With every ring, her pulse pounded harder. The nausea she had battled for months suddenly surged with unbearable force. Finally, he picked up. The distant noise of wind and traffic echoed through the line. "Sophia," Daniel greeted warmly, oblivious to the devastation unraveling on the other end. Hearing his voice was almost enough to break her. Almost. Her grip tightened around the phone. "Daniel," she said, her voice unsteady but laced with steel. "I need you to come home. Now." A slight pause. "I'm in a meeting, darling. Can it wait?" "No," she whispered. Then firmer, "No, it can't." Even from miles away, she knew he could sense it. Something was very, very wrong. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Daniel stood frozen, his face pale as he stared at the letter in his trembling hands. Sophia had memorized every word on that page, burned them into her mind like a cruel scar, but she wanted to hear it from him. "Say it," she demanded, her voice tight with rage. "Say it out loud." He swallowed hard, his grip tightening around the paper. "It was a mistake," he whispered. "I swear it ended." Sophia let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Ended? Daniel Laurent, listed as the father. That doesn't sound like something that ended." He flinched. His name, printed in black ink, was undeniable proof of his betrayal. She crossed her arms over her stomach, as if shielding their unborn child from the poison in the air. "You have another baby on the way, and you didn't think I deserved to know?" Her voice cracked, but she refused to let the tears fall. Daniel took a hesitant step forward. "Sophia, please." She recoiled, eyes blazing. Don't you dare try to touch me." His jaw clenched, desperation flickering across his face. "I was lonely," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "You were busy, we were distant, and Her breath caught. Lonely. The word felt like acid on her tongue. "You had me, your wife, the woman carrying your child, and you were lonely?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. "It didn't mean anything." Sophia shook her head. "It meant everything." A sharp silence fell between them. The grand estate, the glittering chandeliers, the lavish furniture, it all felt meaningless now. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice breaking. Her laughter was hollow. "Yet here we are." She turned away, unable to look at him. unable to breathe in the same space without feeling suffocated. The dream she had built with him had crumbled into dust, and all that remained was the wreckage of what could have been. Daniel moved closer, desperate. "Please, Sophia, we can fix this." She spun to face him, fury and heartbreak colliding in her eyes. "Fix this?" She placed a trembling hand on her belly. "You want me to stay, to pretend this never happened? To raise our child knowing his father has another family?" Daniel's silence was answer enough. Sophia inhaled deeply, steadying herself. This was the moment she knew. She had to leave. Without another word, she turned, walking toward the door. Daniel called her name, but she didn't stop. She wouldn't let him break her again. The walls of the mansion felt like a prison, each room a reminder of the life she thought she had. Sophia locked herself in the upstairs bedroom, the one that had once been a guest room, but now felt like the only place she belonged. The master suite, the bed she had shared with Daniel, was tainted. She couldn't bear to be near it. Outside the door, Daniel paced, his voice raw with desperation. "Sophia, please, let me in." She ignored him. The weight of her heartbreak was suffocating, her chest tight with grief. She curled up on the bed, pressing play on a classical playlist, hoping the familiar notes would soothe her, but nothing could silence the storm inside her. Tears blurred her vision as she reached for her journal, the one she had bought on their honeymoon in Capri, meant for cherished memories. Now it would hold the wreckage of her shattered love. Why did he cheat? Was it my fault? What about our baby? Could I ever trust him again? Each question sliced through her like a blade. Sleep was impossible. She wandered the mansion at dawn, aimless, haunted by the ghosts of what should have been. She stopped in front of the nursery. It was unfinished, half-painted walls and unopened furniture boxes, a cruel metaphor for the future she had envisioned but would never have. A decision settled in her heart. She had to leave, not just for herself, but for her child. She couldn't raise a baby in a home built on deception. She needed to escape before Daniel's empty apologies convinced her to stay. By the time the sun rose, she still didn't know where she would go. Her family's estate in Massachusetts, or perhaps somewhere far away, where no one knew the name Daniel Laurent. But one thing was certain: she couldn't stay here. Daniel's pleas continued, his calls and texts relentless. She ignored them. Later that morning, when he left for an important board meeting, she knew this was her only chance. She sat at her vanity, gripping a pen, and began to write. "Daniel, you have inflicted a wound so deep that every breath I take feels laced with betrayal. Perhaps I was foolish to trust you completely, to believe in the fairy tale. Now I see it for what it is, a beautiful lie. I am leaving. I don't know when or if I will return. Our child, my child, doesn't deserve the world you have created. Maybe one day I will learn to forgive. But right now I can barely look at you. Don't look for me. You won't find me. By the time you read this, I'll be gone." Her hands trembled as she folded the letter, but for the first time since discovering the truth, she felt in control. The pen shook in her hand, but Sophia didn't let herself waver. She folded the letter, sealed it inside an unmarked envelope, and placed it neatly on Daniel's nightstand, the final piece of herself she would leave behind. She inhaled deeply, willing her body to stay steady. There was no room for second thoughts. With quiet determination, she grabbed her small bag. A few essentials: passport, cash, some clothes, and her prenatal vitamins. No more, no less. The mansion was silent as she descended the grand staircase, the polished floors gleaming beneath the dim chandeliers. The staff stood at a respectful distance, their eyes filled with something between sadness and understanding. No one stopped her. A black SUV idled near the side entrance, waiting. With one last glance at the house that had once felt like a dream, one that had become nothing more than a beautiful prison, she stepped inside the car and disappeared into the night. 2 days later, Daniel returned home, expecting a fragile truce. Instead, he was greeted with an eerie silence. His voice echoed through the mansion. "Sophia?" No response. Frowning, he turned to the staff, but their expressions sent a chill through him. "Where is she?" A hesitant pause. "She left, sir. In a car. We don't know where." His pulse pounded in his ears. His first thought was that she had gone to her mother's estate in Massachusetts. He dialed Elizabeth Laurent, his breath shallow. "Where is she?" he demanded the moment she answered. A sharp intake of breath. Then cold fury. Gone, Daniel, and if you had any decency left, you wouldn't be calling me. Sophia wasn't with her. A rare, suffocating panic gripped him as he tore through the house, searching for something. Anything. Then, in their bedroom, he saw it. A single envelope resting on his nightstand. His hands shook as he opened it. "Don't look for me. You won't find me." The words carved through him like a blade. Daniel Laurent, the man who controlled billion-dollar deals, who dictated the fate of corporations, had lost the one thing he could never buy back. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the letter crumpling in his grip. A wave of nausea clawed at his stomach. He had convinced himself that his affair had been meaningless, a brief lapse, a mistake that could be buried. But this was irreversible. Sophia, his wife, the mother of his unborn child, had vanished. And for the first time in his life, Daniel Laurent realized what true regret felt like. Daniel exhausted every resource at his disposal. He hired the best private investigators, tapped into his security network, and even offered financial incentives to anyone who could provide information. But Sophia had planned her escape flawlessly. Every attempt to trace her credit card activity led to a dead end. There were no flight records, no bank withdrawals beyond the initial cash she had taken. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. His frustration turned to obsession. Every night, he woke drenched in sweat, haunted by visions of her crying. He heard her voice in the silence, saw her reflection in strangers. Sleep became a luxury he no longer deserved. For the first time in his life, Daniel Laurent, a man who once believed money could fix anything, realized there was nothing left to fix. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Sophia stepped into a new life. She had chosen a small town outside Seattle, Marymount, a coastal village known for its lighthouse and misty harbors. It was quiet, hidden, a place where neither her family nor Daniel had any connections. The gray skies suited her mood, the endless drizzle washing away the remnants of her past. She rented a modest cottage from an elderly widow named Martha Weston, who had been leasing it to seasonal travelers. Martha, though curious about Sophia's past, didn't press. She simply welcomed her with warm tea and an understanding nod. Each morning, Sophia woke early, listening to the rhythmic waves outside her window. She cradled her growing belly, whispering soft promises to the baby inside. "You and me, little one, we'll be okay," she wrote in her journal daily, pouring her heartbreak onto the pages. She let the pain flow from her fingertips, hoping that, with every word, the burden would lessen. But her body soon reminded her that grief was not the only thing she had to carry. By her 6th month, the exhaustion became heavier. The simple act of walking left her breathless. She found a local OB/GYN, Dr. Henry Whitmore, a kind man with salt and pepper hair who immediately sensed her stress. "You're carrying more than just a child," he said gently. "I'd recommend speaking to someone." Reluctantly, she agreed to see a counselor. Her first session was with Dr. Camille Delgado, a woman with kind eyes and a voice that made Sophia feel safe for the first time in months. "Tell me about the baby's father," Dr. Delgado asked softly. Sophia hesitated, her hands instinctively covering her belly. How could she explain that the man she had once loved had also been the one to break her? The question lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Tell me about the baby's father." Sophia's breath caught, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her dress. How could she explain that the man who had once been her safe place was now the source of her deepest wounds? "He's someone I once trusted," she whispered, her voice fragile yet resolute. Dr. Delgado said nothing, allowing the silence to stretch between them. The kindness in her eyes made it harder for Sophia to keep the emotions buried. She wanted to forget that a father even existed. Every day tested her resolve. At times she missed the effortless luxuries of her old life. A driver to take her wherever she wished, a housekeeper to make the world feel less chaotic, the best medical care money could buy. But freedom had its own richness. She walked along the shore unrecognized, letting the wind tangle her hair, watching the ferries disappear into the horizon. There by the water, she imagined a life untouched by betrayal. Some nights she sat on a weathered bench and let the ocean breeze carry away her unshed tears before they ever reached her cheeks. Meanwhile, Daniel's world was unraveling. With Sophia missing, Juliet Hayes saw an opportunity. Unlike Sophia, Juliet had always been strategic, using her relationship with Daniel to secure her place in the world. Her patience had worn thin. She wanted more. Public acknowledgement, financial security, and most importantly, the Laurent name for her unborn child. At first, Daniel ignored her escalating demands, hoping money would keep her satisfied. A penthouse in Boston, trust funds, endless medical bills covered, he gave her everything except what she truly wanted. His presence. She began showing up at his Manhattan office, her growing belly an unspoken threat. Whispers rippled through his staff as she paraded past them, demanding his time. Every encounter made him feel like a man suffocating under the weight of his own mistakes. Juliet wanted him to attend doctor's appointments, rub her swollen feet, promise her that she wasn't a dirty secret. But every time he looked at her, he saw something far worse, the devastation he had inflicted on Sophia. He had split his life in two. On one side, a desperate search for the woman he had lost. On the other, a responsibility he never wanted, but could no longer ignore. Some nights, he avoided going home altogether, opting instead for his office couch or a quiet hotel room where guilt couldn't reach him. Then, a lead surfaced. A withdrawal. $50,000 had been taken from Sophia's personal trust at a bank in Seattle. It wasn't proof, but it was something. Without hesitation, Daniel Laurent boarded his private jet, determined to chase the last fragile thread connecting him to his wife. Daniel Laurent spent countless days in Washington, determined to track down his missing wife, Sophia Laurent. Even in bustling Seattle, every inquiry he made was met with closed doors and strict confidentiality protocols. The bank refused to release any video footage without a court order, and his desperate attempts to bribe employees only backfired, leaving him with a frustrating dead end. All Daniel had was a fragmented timeline of events and a potential lead from a local motel. When he finally arrived there, he discovered that Sophia had long vanished, likely retreating to her secluded cottage in Marymount, a quiet coastal haven far removed from his life of opulence. As he drove aimlessly through the rain-soaked streets, Daniel realized with a sinking heart that if Sophia truly wished to disappear, no amount of money, power, or influence could bring her back. In that moment, Daniel Laurent, the man who once believed money could fix everything, understood the full extent of his loss. Regret weighed upon him like an unyielding stone for months on end, his once formidable will now eroding into despair. Meanwhile, Sophia, now in her 7th month of pregnancy, persisted in her efforts to remain independent despite daily hardships. She frequented the local library, borrowing books on childbirth and parenting, devouring each page with anxious determination to prepare for a future without him. At neighborhood thrift stores, she carefully selected baby clothes, deliberately avoiding major purchases that might draw unwanted attention. Loneliness often crept in during the quiet hours of the night. There were moments when Sophia almost reached out to her estranged family, fearing that her mother might be frantic with worry. She recalled her late father, imagining the disappointment in his eyes if he saw her struggle alone, and even thought of Daniel. Despite the searing pain of betrayal, fleeting memories of the comforting warmth of his embrace would soften her heart for a moment, though those moments were quickly overshadowed by the harsh reality of his infidelity. One late afternoon, after a routine prenatal checkup, Sophia felt a dizzy spell overcome her as she stepped off the clinic steps. Neighbors rushed to call an ambulance, and at the hospital, doctors diagnosed her with dehydration and elevated blood pressure. A painful reminder of the toll constant stress was taking on both her health and that of her unborn child. Realizing she could no longer shoulder this burden alone, Sophia confided in her kindly landlady, Martha Weston. Martha, who had once endured her own heartbreak, listened intently and shared stories of resilience that forged a quiet bond between them. In Martha's gentle company, Sophia discovered small pockets of hope that flickered like distant stars, illuminating a path to rebuilding her life, even if it was far from the one she once knew. Hope, though fragile, began to guide her. Not everyone in the world was out to betray her. Some were simply there to lend a helping hand. As Sophia adjusted to life in Marymount, Daniel's world continued to spiral. Juliet's pregnancy was advancing, and though he tried to maintain his moral obligation, attending doctor's appointments, ensuring she had everything she needed, it all felt like a carefully constructed lie. The truth was, every moment spent with Juliet was a reminder of what he had lost. But she pushed him to move in, to make their situation public. When he resisted, rumors began swirling, whispers that Sophia Laurent had vanished under suspicious circumstances. Juliet, savoring the attention, leaked stories to the tabloids, painting herself as the devoted mother of his only child while omitting Sophia's pregnancy altogether. "You're making me look like a monster," Daniel snapped at her one evening in her penthouse. Juliet crossed her arms, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Maybe if you did right by me, I wouldn't have to go to the press." Rage simmered beneath his skin. That night, he sat in his car for an hour, staring at the city skyline, suffocated by his own choices. He longed for a time before betrayal had crept into his marriage, before he had ruined the only thing that truly mattered. But he couldn't turn back time. Desperate, he turned to George Langford, a seasoned private investigator with a reputation for uncovering the impossible. At first, George was hesitant about taking on a case for the notoriously scandal-ridden billionaire. But the payout was substantial, and the promise of helping Sophia, wherever she was, pushed him to accept. For weeks, George scoured flight records, rental agreements, and financial transactions. He interviewed Sophia's closest friends, but they remained tight-lipped. "Sophia is safe, and that's all you need to know." Despite the secrecy, George knew one thing. Sophia was smart. She had planned this. A breakthrough finally came when he discovered a lead, a one-way trip from Connecticut to Seattle, paid for in cash. It was the first solid clue in weeks. George pieced together surveillance footage from hotels, ferry terminals, anywhere she might have passed through unnoticed. Then finally, a grainy image surfaced, a woman boarding a ferry. She was visibly pregnant, her posture guarded, but the outline of her face, even in the poor-quality footage, was unmistakable. Daniel gripped the photograph tightly, his chest constricting. Sophia Laurent was out there somewhere, and now he was closer than ever to finding her. George Langford moved through the quiet streets of Marymount, methodically searching for any trace of Sophia Laurent. Days of fruitless inquiries led nowhere until an older woman, a neighbor, recalled a young, pregnant girl who had moved into a nearby cottage. "She keeps to herself," the woman had said. "Sweet, but there's a sadness about her." Following subtle inquiries, George confirmed the woman's name, Sophia Laurent. The final stroke of luck came later that afternoon. As he lingered near a local grocery store, he saw her. The same luminous eyes from the photograph, now shadowed with heartbreak. She wore a loose-fitting coat, but the swell of her pregnancy was unmistakable. She was thinner, her features more delicate than before. George watched from a distance, making no move to approach. Instead, he took note of the direction she walked, confirming her address. Now came the dilemma. Should he inform Daniel immediately, or speak to Sophia first? His professional instincts told him to report back, but something in her fragile appearance made him pause. Instead, that evening, he knocked on the cottage door. The moment Sophia answered, her expression turned to alarm. "Yes?" George removed his hat, his voice low and steady. "Miss Laurent, my name is George Langford. I'm a private investigator hired by your husband." Her breath hitched. Instinctively, she moved to shut the door, but George gently placed a hand against it. "He doesn't know I'm here," he said softly. "He's desperate to find you, but I want to respect your wishes. May I come in? Just to talk." Sophia hesitated, her eyes scanning his face for deception. Something in his calm, measured gaze made her waver. With a reluctant sigh, she stepped aside, allowing him in. The cottage was small but cozy, lined with half-packed boxes and baby items. She gestured toward a chair, though her body language remained guarded. "What do you want?" George met her gaze. "I need to know if you're safe." Her arms instinctively wrapped around her belly. Why would he care? "He's worried sick," George replied simply. "He fears for your health. He's not even sure if you're still pregnant." Sophia's expression flickered between anger and sorrow. "Yes, I'm still pregnant, no thanks to him." George nodded solemnly. "Look, I'm not here to defend him. From what I understand, he made some terrible mistakes. But if you want to stay hidden, I'll respect that. I just need to confirm you're all right, and then I can tell him to leave you alone." Tears welled in her eyes. She had wanted to disappear completely, but a part of her needed closure. She had never expected a private investigator to ask for her side of the story. For the first time since she had left, Sophia let herself speak about it. The betrayal, the other woman, the desperation to protect her unborn child from a life built on deception. George Langford sat across from her, listening intently. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to justify Daniel's actions. When she finished, the weight of her own words settled over her like a storm. George exhaled slowly. "I won't reveal your location if that's what you want. I'll let him know you're alive and safe. But he's determined, Sophia. He might still try to find you." She lowered her gaze, fingers tracing absent patterns on the fabric of her dress. Her voice wavered. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive him, but I do know this. I don't want to see him." George nodded. "Then that's what I'll tell him." Back in New York, Daniel sat tensely as George delivered the news. "I found her. She's safe. She's carrying your child, and she appears to be doing well." Daniel exhaled sharply, relief crashing over him. "Where is she? Please, George, just tell me." George shook his head. "She doesn't want to be found. She made it clear she doesn't want to see you. She needs peace. She wants to focus on her pregnancy." Daniel's first instinct was to fight, to demand, to search harder, but George's expression was unwavering, his words unmovable. Daniel had done enough damage. Instead, he whispered a single question. "Is she happy?" George hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "She's coping. Healing. But this has been incredibly hard on her, Mr. Laurent." Daniel nodded, his throat tightening. For the first time in his life, he had everything yet nothing at all. In the following weeks, he tried to prove he wasn't the same reckless man. He cut off Juliet's attempts to drag his name through the tabloids, issuing legal threats if she continued. Furious, she accused him of abandoning her. But Daniel made it clear, while he would provide for the child he fathered, he would not be manipulated into a relationship. Scandals swirled around Laurent Enterprises. Shareholders whispered, stock prices wavered, and board members questioned his leadership. Then, in a shocking announcement, Daniel stepped down from daily operations, taking a leave of absence to focus on his personal life. For once, the man who had built an empire on relentless ambition was finally looking inward. He started therapy. He tried to atone for the damage he had caused. Perhaps it was too late, perhaps not. Only time would tell. 8 months into her pregnancy, Sophia's water broke unexpectedly on a stormy night. Martha Weston found her doubled over in pain, her breath ragged, her hands trembling. With panic in her voice, Martha called 911. Sophia Laurent was rushed to the hospital, unaware that her past was about to collide with her present in a way she never expected. The ambulance tore through the storm, sirens wailing as rain pounded against the windows. At the hospital, doctors quickly assessed Sophia's condition. Preeclampsia. A dangerous rise in blood pressure, threatening both her life and the baby's. Within minutes, she was rushed into an emergency C-section. The cold sterility of the operating room, the flashing monitors, the frantic voices, it all blurred together. Pain crashed over her in waves, and through the haze, she whispered a name, not out of love, not out of forgiveness, but from a primal, desperate need for comfort. Daniel. Her voice was too faint to be heard. The nurses moved swiftly around her, calling for more supplies, more doctors, and then, at last, a cry. A fragile, piercing wail filled the room. The sound of life, the sound of her child. The doctors lifted a tiny baby boy into the world, his lungs protesting, his presence undeniable. He was small, impossibly delicate, but alive. Sophia fought to stay conscious, her vision swimming. She needed to see him. A kind nurse leaned down. "Your baby is stable, he's breathing." Relief surged through her, hot tears slipping down her cheeks as she caught a glimpse of her son, wrapped in a soft blanket, his face pink and scrunched with effort. But then, the world tilted. A sharp pain tore through her, and suddenly the voices around her grew urgent. Preeclampsia had triggered severe bleeding, and her body was failing. The last thing she heard before the darkness swallowed her was the sound of her baby's cries. Miles away, George Langford sat in his car outside the hospital, uneasy. He had remained in Marymount, sensing that Sophia might need help sooner rather than later. His phone buzzed, and the moment he heard the doctor's grim tone, he knew he couldn't keep his promise. Daniel needed to know. He dialed quickly. The call connected at midnight. "Daniel," he said, his voice urgent. "It's Sophia. She had an emergency C-section. She might not make it. She's at Marymount General Hospital." A sharp inhale. then silence. George could only hear the sound of frantic movement on the other end before the line went dead. Daniel Laurent boarded his private jet within the hour, his pulse hammering with terror. Had he come too late? When he arrived at the small-town hospital, the sight of the billionaire in a wrinkled suit, his usually composed expression shattered, sent a ripple through the staff. George met him in the waiting room, pacing. "She's in surgery," he said. "The baby's in the NICU. He's premature but stable." Daniel staggered, the words hitting him like a blow. A son, his son. And the woman he had betrayed was now fighting for her life. Regret, heavier than he had ever known, crashed over him like a tidal wave. Daniel pressed his palms against his face, his body racked with silent sobs. He had spent years mastering control, yet here he was, helpless, broken, praying for a miracle. Hours passed in excruciating stillness. Then at last, a doctor stepped into the waiting room. "Mr. Laurent?" Daniel shot to his feet, his heart hammering. "She's stable," the doctor said gently, though his tone remained cautious. "We managed to control the bleeding and lower her blood pressure. She's not out of the woods yet, but she's recovering." Relief surged through Daniel so intensely that his knees nearly gave out. He nodded, swallowing past the lump in his throat, but guilt still coiled inside him, tightening like a vice. The doctor offered a hesitant smile. "She might be unconscious for a while. In the meantime, you can see your son in the NICU." A son. The words were still foreign to him, unreal, yet they pulled him forward. With trembling hands, Daniel followed the doctor down the sterile corridor. The walls of the neonatal unit were lined with tiny incubators, each cradling a life too new, too fragile. Then he saw him. A nurse guided Daniel through the sanitization process before leading him to the incubator. There, beneath a tangle of tubes and monitors, lay his child, a small, delicate being with wisps of dark hair and impossibly tiny hands. His heartbeat thundered in his chest as he placed a hesitant hand against the glass. Nothing else mattered. Not the scandals, not Juliet, not the wealth. Just this. Tears slipped down his face. You're so beautiful," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. But then, a painful realization struck him. He didn't even know his own son's name. Sophia had never told him. He had no right to ask, not after everything he had done. But God, he wanted the chance. To sit beside her. To hold their child together. To rebuild what he had shattered. After a few moments, the nurse gently touched his shoulder. "He needs to rest now." Daniel nodded, his heart aching as he stepped away. With heavy steps, he made his way to the recovery ward. The halls buzzed with quiet efficiency, but to him, everything felt unbearably still. A nurse directed him to Sophia's room. The moment he stepped inside, he froze. She looked so small, so fragile beneath the tangle of IV lines. An oxygen mask covered her face, the steady beep of the heart monitor the only reassurance that she was still here. Daniel swallowed hard and sank to his knees beside her bed, taking her cold hand in his. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, please come back. If not for me, then for our son." Tears fell freely now, his head bowing as he clung to her hand. Nurses came and went, offering sympathetic smiles, but none disturbed him. They knew. Some heartbreaks could only be endured in silence. 2 days later, the silence was finally broken. Sophia's eyes fluttered open to a soft, sterile glow. The world felt distant, her body heavy, her thoughts sluggish from medication. The first face she saw was Daniel's, tear-streaked, exhausted. Relief washed over her for the briefest second before it was drowned by something sharper, a spear of anger, of betrayal. She tried to speak, but her throat was raw. A nurse quickly adjusted her bed and brought a small cup of water to her lips. Daniel's voice was hoarse. "The baby's fine." Sophia's breath hitched. "He's in the NICU, but the doctors say he's strong. He's fighting." The love she already carried for her son cut through the haze. She tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through her abdomen. "Where is he?" Her voice came out broken but firm. Daniel hesitated. "I'll take you to see him once you're stable." She barely heard him. The need to see her child eclipsed everything. But when Daniel reached for her hand, she recoiled, her body stiff with mistrust. "What are you doing here?" He exhaled slowly, lowering his gaze. "I had to come. I couldn't let anything happen to you, or to our son." Her heart clenched at his words, but the pain of his betrayal was still too fresh. "You had no right," she whispered, tears burning her eyes. "I told you to leave me alone." Daniel nodded, his own eyes red-rimmed. "I know. And I will, if that's what you want. But please, let me be here for him. Let me help. A battle raged within her. She despised him for what he had done. But the idea of facing this alone, of raising their child without support, terrified her just as much as trusting him again. They spoke little after that. Doctors focused on stabilizing her blood pressure and managing her pain, while Daniel remained just outside her room, refusing to leave the hospital, even though she barely acknowledged him. A week passed before Sophia was strong enough to be wheeled to the NICU. The moment she saw her son, tiny and fragile inside the incubator, her heart shattered. Tears slipped down her face as she reached in, brushing her fingers gently over his impossibly small hand. Daniel stood beside her, reverent and silent. When the baby's fingers curled around hers, a soft sob escaped her lips. She wished, more than anything, for a world where this moment was free of betrayal, where she and Daniel could share in this joy without the weight of the past pressing down on them. As the days passed, both parents attended neonatal classes, learning how to care for a preterm infant. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the first fragile step forward. Under the watchful eyes of NICU nurses, they learned how to care for their son, practicing CPR, monitoring his oxygen levels, and holding him skin to skin. In those moments, their hostility paused, replaced by an unspoken devotion to the fragile life they had created. Sophia watched Daniel interact with their child, his hands trembling as he carefully adjusted the tiny blanket, his voice low and soothing as he whispered lullabies. There was something painfully tender in the way he held their son, a reminder of the love they once shared, now buried under the wreckage of betrayal. But the past couldn't be erased. One afternoon, after days of skirting the inevitable, she finally found the courage to ask, "What about her?" Her voice was quiet but firm. "What about Juliet's baby?" Daniel stiffened. A shadow crossed his face. "I'm supporting her financially," he admitted, "but I'm not with her. Juliet is 7 months along. I know I have responsibilities there, but I don't want a relationship." Sophia closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. "This is complicated." "I know." His voice was thick with regret. "I wish I could change what I did. I don't expect forgiveness, but I promise you this. I'll be here for you, for him, if you'll let me." She had no answer for that. A day later, their baby was moved to a less critical section of the NICU. Each small milestone felt like a victory, a reason to celebrate. Despite everything, Sophia found herself leaning on Daniel's presence more than she wanted to admit. Her body was still recovering, her emotions fragile, and the weight of it all felt unbearable at times. The tension between them lingered like an unhealed wound, but necessity forced them into an uneasy truce. 2 weeks after the birth, Sophia was discharged, though their son had to remain in the hospital a little longer. The thought of returning to her small cottage, its steep steps, its quiet isolation, felt overwhelming. Daniel offered an alternative. "A suite at the hotel," he suggested. "It has medical staff on call. You won't be alone." Accepting meant acknowledging that she needed his support. It meant allowing him into her world again, but she had no other choice. Reluctantly, she agreed. Thus began a tentative coexistence. Each day, they spent hours in the NICU, absorbing every lesson, every instruction, preparing for the day their son would finally come home. Sophia, both physically and emotionally drained, sometimes found herself unraveling. In those moments, Daniel would silently pass her a tissue or take her hand, never pushing for more. At night, the unspoken boundaries remained. She insisted on her own bedroom while he stayed in an adjoining suite. They were partners in parenthood. Nothing more. Yet beneath the surface, something unspoken lingered. Tension simmered beneath the surface. One evening, Sophia woke from a nightmare, her mind dragging her back to the horrors of the emergency C-section. She couldn't breathe. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she stumbled into the common area of the suite, desperate for air. Daniel was there. He sat hunched over his laptop, business documents open before him. But the moment he saw her distress, he shot up, concern overtaking his exhausted features. Without hesitation, he guided her to the couch, pressing a cool glass of water into her hands. A reassuring hand rested lightly on her shoulder, steadying her trembling frame. For the first time, she didn't pull away. Instead, she clung to him, her sobs racking her body as the fear of nearly dying consumed her. Daniel's grip tightened around her, his hand stroking her hair in quiet, wordless comfort. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, over and over. "For everything." By the time her tears subsided, exhaustion tugged at her, her body sinking into his warmth. Their eyes met, and for the briefest second, something flickered. A ghost of what once was. But by morning, Sophia reminded herself, healing was not the same as forgetting. Meanwhile, Juliet Hayes was livid. She had heard whispers of Daniel's presence in Seattle and was furious that he had abandoned her during the final stages of her pregnancy. Her voicemails dripped with rage, threats laced between her words. She demanded to know why he wasn't at her side, why he had seemingly erased her from his life. When Daniel finally answered, his patience was frayed. "I'm in Seattle because my wife nearly died giving birth to our son," he said flatly. "I'm fulfilling my duties as a father." Juliet scoffed. "And what about me? I'm carrying your child too. When are you going to be here for us?" Guilt clawed at his chest. Two innocent children were now tangled in this web of mistakes. "I will support my child," he said, his voice strained. "But I can't be in two places at once." In the final weeks of her pregnancy, Juliet ramped up legal threats. If Daniel didn't publicly claim paternity, she would release private messages, personal details, anything to humiliate him. But for the first time in his life, Daniel Laurent didn't care about public opinion. All that mattered was ensuring Sophia and their son survived this ordeal. Still, for the sake of the unborn child, he sought resolution. His lawyers negotiated a settlement. Juliet would receive a substantial monthly stipend and a trust fund for the baby, contingent on signing a non-disclosure agreement. She begrudgingly agreed, but resentment still burned beneath the surface. At 6 weeks old, their son was finally discharged from the hospital. As Sophia cradled him in her arms, tears welled in her eyes. His name was Nicholas. Tiny but strong, eyes alert and curious, proof that love, even when broken, could still create something pure. Returning to the cottage was no longer an option. Sophia knew its isolation wasn't safe for a recovering mother and a fragile newborn. Yet, she wasn't ready to go back to Connecticut to the life she had abandoned. For now, she remained in limbo. Out of necessity, she accepted Daniel's resources, and together they rented a modest townhouse near the hospital. Nicholas needed access to specialized pediatric care, and despite her hesitations, she couldn't deny that Daniel had been present, more than she had ever expected. What was meant to be a temporary arrangement quickly wove them into an unintended routine: late-night feedings, diaper changes, midnight lullabies. Through every shared moment, tension lingered, but so did something unexpected, a tenderness she wasn't ready to name. Sophia noticed changes in Daniel. He was no longer the man constantly glued to his phone, orchestrating billion-dollar deals between flights. The calls were fewer. The restless energy that once consumed him had faded. Instead, his focus remained on Nicholas's health, on Sophia's recovery. He even attended therapy, a commitment she hadn't expected. It was in one of those sessions that she finally let go of the rage she had bottled up for months. Tears spilled freely as she recounted every moment of her heartbreak, every betrayal, every sleepless night spent questioning how the man she had loved had become a stranger. Daniel didn't defend himself. He didn't try to rationalize his actions. He simply listened. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, raw. He admitted his own insecurities, the ways he had sought validation in the worst possible places. It wasn't an excuse, but it was the first time she saw the flawed, deeply broken man beneath the betrayal. "I don't know if I'll ever trust you again," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "At least not the way I used to." Daniel swallowed hard. "I accept that. I know I have to earn even a fraction of your trust again, and if it takes a lifetime, so be it." 3 months after Nicholas's birth, an unexpected call shattered their fragile balance. Juliet had given birth prematurely. A daughter, Cassandra. The baby was in critical condition, her small body struggling against complications. Despite their fractured relationship, Juliet had reached out to Daniel, desperate. Her hospital lacked the proper neonatal care, and Cassandra needed specialized treatment. Sophia burned with jealousy at the mention of Juliet's name. But she also saw the anguish in Daniel's eyes, the guilt. An innocent child was in trouble. Ignoring Juliet's plea would condemn him to a lifetime of regret. And so, in a moment that surprised even herself, Sophia encouraged him to go. "Make sure she's okay," she said softly. Daniel hesitated, searching her face for resentment. There was still pain, still wounds that ran deep. But there was also something else, the faintest trace of understanding. That night, Daniel boarded a plane to Boston, ensuring Cassandra received the best care money could buy. Daniel stayed in Boston just long enough to ensure Cassandra was stable under the care of pediatric specialists. Then, determined to prove where his heart truly lay, he returned to Seattle within the week. During his absence, Sophia found herself missing his presence more than she wanted to admit. She caught glimpses of herself in the mirror, holding Nicholas, and remembered the nights Daniel had stood behind her, guiding her hands, his touch steadying her own uncertainty as a new mother. Even if their marriage never fully healed, she couldn't deny the comfort of having someone to share the weight of parenthood. When Daniel finally came back, exhaustion etched across his face. They had a long talk. "Cassandra's stable," he told her. "I'll be traveling to Boston periodically to see her. I owe her that much." Sophia nodded, her gaze drifting down to Nicholas, who dozed peacefully in her arms. "I can't begrudge you that," she murmured. In the days that followed, they found a quiet, unspoken acceptance. The future was uncertain, messy, but they had been bound by something stronger than betrayal, love for their son, a love that overshadowed even the wreckage of the past. The final turning point came on a warm summer afternoon, 6 months after Nicholas's birth. Sophia, now stronger and more confident in her role as a mother, decided it was time to face her past. She needed to see her family in Massachusetts. She surprised herself by inviting Daniel to come along. When they arrived at her mother's estate, tension hung thick in the air. Elizabeth O'Connor stood waiting, arms folded, her stern gaze flickering between them. But the moment she saw Nicholas, her composure crumbled. With tears brimming in her eyes, she reached for her grandson, cradling him as if she had been holding him all along. Then, in private, she turned to Daniel. "I trusted you with my daughter's happiness," she said, voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "And you failed her terribly." Daniel met her gaze, shame evident in his expression. "I know," he admitted, "and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." Elizabeth studied him for a long, measured moment. "If Sophia can find it in her heart to forgive you, then I will too," she said at last. "But if you betray her again, there won't be another chance." That night, in the quiet of the guest bedroom, Sophia finally voiced the question that had lingered in her heart. "Do you still love me?" Daniel's eyes welled up. "With everything I have left," he whispered. "It took losing you to realize how much you meant to me." She sighed, cradling Nicholas against her chest. "I don't know if our marriage can be saved," she admitted. "But for his sake, I'm willing to try." Daniel took her free hand gently. "That's all I can ask." And so, step by step, they began the long road toward rebuilding trust. Together, they navigated the delicate balance of co-parenting Nicholas with unwavering love and care. Daniel also remained present for Cassandra, ensuring she had the stability she deserved, but never in a way that infringed upon Sophia's emotional boundaries. Ariana was still a lingering presence, but Daniel kept their interactions strictly limited to discussions about their child. Therapy continued. There were countless arguments, painful silences, and nights when Sophia needed space, retreating to a separate bedroom just to process the tangled emotions that still lived within her. But there were also victories. Nicholas's first tooth, his first steps, his first birthday. Moments that reminded them of something deeper than betrayal, the unbreakable bond they shared as parents. Eventually, Sophia agreed to move back to Greenwich, but on her own terms. They sold the vast estate that once symbolized the cracks in their marriage and downsized to a smaller, more intimate family home. Together, they decorated Nicholas's bedroom, filling it with vibrant colors and whimsical designs. Sophia insisted on reclaiming a piece of herself outside of motherhood and marriage. She returned to work part-time at her family's publishing house, finding independence in a way that reminded her she was more than just a wife or a mother. She was still her own person. It wasn't perfect. The shadows of betrayal never fully disappeared. Some wounds, no matter how much time passes, never truly heal. But Daniel's remorse was real. His love was real. Through daily acts of trust-building, Sophia realized she could love him again. Not blindly, not in the naive way she once had, but cautiously, with the lessons of heartbreak seared into her memory. Daniel, for his part, had changed. Gone was the man who once prioritized power above all else. He stepped back from his relentless pursuit of wealth, learning instead to savor the moments that mattered. He attended marital retreats, read books on emotional intimacy, showed gratitude for every second chance Sophia was willing to give. And so, they embarked on a new path. It was neither a fairy tale nor a tragedy, but a testament to resilience. Their story became a reminder that betrayal can shatter lives, yet forgiveness, though slow and painful, can stitch them back together, piece by fragile piece. In the end, Sophia Laurent proved that even the deepest heartbreak could be met with unwavering strength. She chose her own path, one where love didn't vanish in the face of betrayal, but instead transformed into something rawer, something real. And Daniel Laurent learned that wealth and power mean nothing without respect and loyalty. Their journey was steeped in pain, but illuminated by hope, proving that sometimes the hardest fights yield the greatest rewards, if we dare to believe in redemption. Thank you for joining us on this emotional roller coaster. If their story resonated with you, please like this video, share it with friends who appreciate a gripping drama, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that stir the heart. Until next time, stay inspired.